Welcome, Joyce.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you here. It is April 9th, I have this date incorrect here, 2008, and we are at Porto Novelli in New York City, and I want to thank Joyce Hergenhan for coming down from Connecticut and away from the golf course on a beautiful day to just spend a little time with us and talking about her career and her thoughts on public relations. So why don't we start out looking at your early career. Now you received a Bachelor of Arts from Syracuse, and then eventually an MBA from Columbia, which was about 15 years after that. You worked as a journalist for Gannett newspapers and as the press secretary and speechwriter for U.S. Representative Ogden Reed. Can you describe your experience working in these varied fields and how that prepared you for your career at Consolidated Edison?
When I was in high school and in college, all I wanted to be when I grew up was a print journalist. I loved writing, I loved reading, I loved the world around me. And so at Syracuse, I had a dual major in political science and a newspaper. And I was editor of the college daily newspaper there. And I figured I wanted to go start a career at the Associated Press, which was a good place to start a career as a print journalist. So they were interviewing on campus, and I went to the interview. And the first thing the man said to me was, "I don't know why I'm wasting my time talking with you. I've never hired a woman, and I never will." And in 1963, it was perfectly legal for him to say that. And of course, I spent the next 10 minutes trying to convince him he was wrong, but to no avail. So I went back to work that summer at the paper that I'd worked for in northern Westchester the previous summer. And I was there for about a year. I covered, it was a big deal. I mean, I was 21 years old, and I was covering, town government and politics, and it was kind of fun. And then I went to work for a congressman, for Ogden Reed, and I did that for 4 years. And then he recruited me. I'd covered him a few times. He recruited me. Then Gannett papers in Westchester County were always trying to convince me to come back, And after 4 years of working for the congressman, I was getting married, and I didn't want to be commuting back and forth. So I did go to Gannett, and I was at Gannett for 4 years, and I covered politics, government, a lot of business. There was no real business news people at Gannett back then, so I feel that I covered a lot of business. And I wound up covering Con Ed during some rather tumultuous times at Con Ed, and they recruited me for a job. So I went to work there as a manager of public information, and within a few years I was vice president and senior vice president of public affairs, and here in Manhattan. And it was a crazy, wild time. And my favorite Con Ed story, if I may digress,
yes,
is that in July of 1977 was the Great Blackout. And I was the assistant vice president for public affairs at the time. My boss, the vice president, was in Israel. And so I was acting vice president. I was also going through a divorce. I was going to school full-time at Columbia. And it was just so much going on in my life. And I had just moved from my house into a one-room sublet apartment on the 29th floor at Columbus Avenue and 66th Street. And at 9:30 at night, I just walked in the door. I'd been in a study group with my pals, Joan Freilich and Emily Marks, my two friends from Columbia Business School. Just walked in the apartment, took off my clothes, and the lights went out. Well, up until the previous Saturday, 4 days earlier, I lived all of my life in the suburbs. The lights always went out. Car hits pole, lights go out. Branch hits wires, lights go out. This is the middle of Manhattan, and the lights go out. And I looked out the window, and sure enough, all of Manhattan was dark. So I called the Con Edison Energy Control Center, which ironically was 2 blocks away. It was in West End and 66th. And guy answered the phone. I said, "Hi, John." I said, "This is Joyce. I'm here in Manhattan. There's no electricity. What happened?" And he said, "We lost the system." And I said, "Oh." I said, how'd that happen? And he said, well, we lost some lines to lightning, da 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 da. And I said, fine, I'll be right over to the control center. Just make sure security keeps all the media out on the sidewalk, and I'll be right there. So I quickly got dressed and ran down 29 flights of stairs, actually, which put me in the basement because I forgot no building has a 13th floor. So then I ran up a flight of stairs. I got out onto the street. Of course, it was dark, it was chaos, and horns were honking. And I mean, it was just unbelievable. And all of a sudden, I realized that in my haste to get dressed, I'd put on a pair of jeans and a magenta tie-dyed T-shirt with a frog with a butterfly on its nose. Okay, off goes the Con Ed spokeswoman, just like some lost hippie. So I get over to the Energy Control Center, and I go upstairs, and I get a quick briefing as to what happened. And so I go down to the sidewalk where there's throngs of media, as you can imagine. I mean, and of course, here we were in Manhattan, which was totally blacked out, and those new Trump buildings on the other side of West End had not been built yet. So you had a clear view of New Jersey. And of course, what is New Jersey? It's all lit up. And here we are in Manhattan, and it's all dark. Terrible placement to be standing, I have to tell you. So anyhow, I explained, what had happened. That it had been 100 degrees for like 10 days in a row at that time. I mean, the city was just baking. It was so hot and humid. And we were importing a lot of power from upstate New York and from Canada on these big transmission lines. And there was a horrible thunder and lightning storm up in Dutchess County, and it took out two of these big transmission lines. And that put the system into total overbalance because there was more of a draw on it than it had energy coming into it. And so in order that it didn't blow up, it shut itself down. Okay, short version. Anyhow, so I go through all this and I explain all this to these reporters. And this one guy keeps giving me a bad time. He says, it's lightning. You mean to tell me that the Con Ed can't design against lightning? I said, Con Ed uses the most up-to-date, advanced things there are, but lightning, lightning's an act of God. You can't always, prepare for an act of God. Okay. 2 days later, Village Voice comes out. Con Ed blames God for blackout. I should have brought it with me. It's a great headline. Con Ed blames God for blackout. So that was my enduring contribution to Con Ed. And Charles Luce, who was the CEO then of Con Ed, the longtime CEO, died about a month ago, from today actually, 2 months, end of January. And in his obituary, his family asked me to write an obituary, which I did, but of course the Times is going to do their own thing of it. And so in the obituary, they had poor Chuck saying act of God, and it wasn't, he never said it, it was I. So, but then we're going back, and that's how the coverage was so frantic during those 24 hours that the city was without power. Anyhow, that's my Con Ed story. I wanted to save that for posterity someplace. Anyhow, so I was there, and I was really enjoying Con Ed. And I was just had a senior vice president, and I was thought I'd be there. I loved living in Manhattan. By that time, I'd moved out of the one-room sublet, and I had a nice condo, co-op actually, a nice co-op on East 79th Street, and thought I'd spend the rest of my life there. And one cold winter's day, I got a phone call from a search firm guy named John Johnson from a firm called LaMaille Associates, and he had a position that he thought I might be, a candidate for. Could we have dinner? So, talk about it. He wouldn't tell me the name of the company, but he told me enough that I figured out that it was probably GE. And so we had dinner, and didn't hear anything for, a month or so. So I figured, he's not interested. I don't care. I'm not that. He also confirmed that it was GE at dinner. And so, but then a month or so later, I hear from him again, apologized for taking so long, but they wanted me to go up to Fairfield, Connecticut, to meet with a guy named Frank Doyle, who was the then senior vice president for corporate relations at GE. And fine. So I get, so I tell Con Ed that I'm taking the day off, because I'm having dental surgery. I was having so much dental surgery at the time. It was very plausible that I was having dental surgery. And so I took the day off, and the night before going up there, I broke my toe. And and I don't know whether you've ever had a broken toe, but they hurt, and you can't wear shoes. There's nothing to treat a broken toe. It just is going to eventually heal itself, and you just try to wear shoes that you can get on your feet. And in my case, I had to use something I already owned because I had to leave for Connecticut very early the next morning. I did not have the luxury of going shopping to buy things. So I had an old ratty pair of beat-up sneakers, and it was the only thing I could get on my poor foot with the broken toe. So I show up at Frank Doyle's office, and I think I said, "Hi, I'm Joyce Hergenhan. Nice to meet you. I don't always wear sneakers, but I broke my toe, and they're the only shoes that I could get on my foot." I said it all like in one word. I was so mortified that I was walking into his office wearing sneakers. I'm sure he wouldn't have noticed. Moral of story, don't obsess about things like the fact that you're wearing the wrong shoes. Look at me. I mean, I'm wearing flip-flops. They're comfortable. That's what I do. So anyhow, that's why I met Frank. And then another month went by, I didn't hear. And then I had to go back. And then I had to go and meet the vice chairman, John Burlingame. So again, I went up to Connecticut. I met the vice chairman, John Burlingame. We had a very pleasant meeting. Again, I said I had a dental situation. And so then a month passes again, and I hear that I'm everybody's candidate for this job. But I have to meet Jack Welch. Okay, well, Jack Welch wasn't famous as Jack Welch then. Jack Welch had just become CEO. And Jack Welch was just the punk kid who had replaced the great Reg Jones, because obviously I did a lot of research on this subject. Pre-internet, I might add, I had to use the old Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. Anyhow, he wasn't Jack Welch. He was, this kid who replaced Reg. So anyhow, we're having. So I said to the headhunter, I said, I really can't take another day off to go to Connecticut. He says, no. He says, Jack will come into the city. He'd have lunch with you. So we're having lunch. And I walk into the restaurant, which was La Perigord Park. And Jack was already there, so we shake hands, sit down. Hi, hi. Okay. He pulls out, he has an envelope. And he pulls out some paper from an envelope. And he says to me, it says here that you are a sports trivia expert, are you? And I said, Jack, that search guy talked to everybody I've known since I was 4 years old. I have no idea what's in there. He says, come on, are you a sports trivia expert or not? So what do you do? I said, okay, try me. So he said, who played second base for the 1946 Boston Red Sox? And I said, Bobby Doerr. And he said, but who held the ball? And I said, you mean who held the ball when Enos Slaughter scored from first base on a single to win the 1946 World Series for the Cardinals against the Red Sox? He said, what else would I mean? I said, Johnny Pesky. And he said, oh, that was too easy. Let's talk about something else. That was the beginning of my job interview with Jack Welch. That's how it started. And the reason why he did that was that GE did not have a woman officer, had never had a woman officer, and had never hired an officer from the outside. All their people had grown up within the company and gone through their training programs and moved from Fort Wayne to Cincinnati to Schenectady to Lynn, the usual GE way. But they've never brought in an officer from the outside, much less a woman. And he figured, and it was a very much of a locker room, macho kind of place. And he figured that a woman who knew something about sports would be less different. And so we had a good interview. And then I got offered the job. But then I couldn't decide whether to take it because I loved living in Manhattan. And I was working for a CEO who didn't much care about the public affairs aspect of the job at that point. I had a new CEO. His name was Arthur Halsberg. And he was an engineer, and he didn't care about going to parties at Gracie Mansion or doing all this stuff that kind of went with the territory. And so I was enjoying that. And I figured, going up to, suburbia, where everyone kind of comes two by two as a divorced woman, this might not be fun. But so I agonized over it for like a week. And finally I was told, okay, make up your mind. We have to know on Monday morning. So that Sunday afternoon, I was with my friend of mine, and we were watching I was agonizing with him all afternoon. We'd gone bicycle riding, and then we'd gone back to my apartment. No, actually, we were in a bar, I think. We were in a bar, and I was still agonizing over what to do. And the U.S. Open golf tournament was on this TV in the bar. And it was when Jack Nicklaus was in the clubhouse with a one-stroke lead, and Tom Watson was on the 18th hole, 17th. 17th green, or approaching 17th green. But he hit the ball into a bunker, and all the announcers said that he has to play this safe. He just has to, chip it up a little bit and play it safe. Otherwise, he runs a horrible risk of hitting it way over the green. And so what does he do? He goes for it. And it went into the cup. And it's one of the most famous shots in the history of golf. And that happened as I was sitting there agonizing. I said, okay, that's my omen. He went for it. I'm going to go for it. And that's how I decided to go there. It was because Tom Watson hit a ball into the cup. Anyhow, so that is how I wound up at GE.
Wow.
So my life has been fun, in case you're not getting the point.
That.
So.
Oh, jeez. Well, let's talk about GE.
Okay.
A little bit about what your time. You're 22 years, right?
Right.
Okay. Okay. When you started then, Jack was relatively new. You were new, and GE was transitioning from am I correct in saying a manufacturing company to a services
and technology?
Technology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Now you're in this new position, and you have to make the public aware of this new expanded role of General Electric. What was that like? Were there challenges?
Well, yeah, there were challenges because, to begin with, one of the things that GE was doing, this was Jack. I mean, you have to understand Jack. He's very strong-willed, strong-minded, high energy, decisive, and he figures things out. He's very strategic and very tactical both. He's just very, very smart. And he saw before anybody how global the world was getting and how competitive things were. And so we were going to get out of businesses that weren't big money-making businesses for us. And we were going to close down factories that weren't efficient. And we were going to manufacture things maybe in Mexico rather than in California. And so in 1982, GE closed down a steam iron plant in Ontario, California, that, and the work was going to be sent out of the country. And that wound up on 60 Minutes because no one had ever done that before. It was the first time a healthy company had shut down a factory just to move the work out of the country. So, as I said, it was such news that it made 60 Minutes. And so the world quickly learned what was happening at GE, but not in the nicest possible way. They were seeing the factories being shut down, some old line GE businesses such as housewares. Everybody thinks of, people still think GE makes toaster ovens and irons. They haven't in 25 years. GE sold the business, but people thought that, God, GE was selling its birthright by selling that business and moving all these jobs, shutting down all these factories. And so it was pretty bad right then. I mean, and as a matter of fact, shortly after I joined the company, cover story in Fortune magazine was toughest boss in America. And it was Jack, because he was doing this kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I started. I started with this. And so it then became a question of trying to educate, not just the media, our own employees. Had a very important audience is your own employees, which you never should forget. So it was our own employees, it was the media, it was Wall Street, it was government agencies. I mean, there were a lot of constituencies involved here. And the most important thing in this is to tell everybody the same thing. I think a lot of times people think they can tell their employees one thing and tell Wall Street something else, and they'll never find out. Not true. especially today. We'll talk about that later, I suspect, about what it's like today in this 24/7 world. So, so that was quite a challenge, and I just think we did it by a consistent message, and also we began to get results, and other companies began to copy GE, which I think gave it credibility. It'd be tragic for some of these little towns, where the only game in town was a GM factory or a GE factory or an IBM factory or something. I mean, tragic for these little towns. But for the greater enterprise to survive and for America to stay competitive, otherwise you'd have a country here with buying nothing that was made and sold by a U.S. company. That it'd all be, companies from Southeast Asia and Latin America. So that was quite an interesting time. The educating, I would say, communicating and educating all these audiences about what we were doing and why we were doing it.
Let me ask you something that wasn't necessarily in here, but so this is a time of crisis for you. Did GE have a code of ethics or any mission statements or anything to follow?
Yeah, I don't know whether there was one before I joined the company. I was not aware of one when I came. But early on, Jack said, we need to do this, what we believe in, who we are, what we believe in. And rather than having, some person like me sit down and write something, it was kind of thrown open to all kinds of groups at all levels to come up with ideas. And then there was something developed by a huge, consensus, and then it was circulated to a whole lot of other people. So it was a thing that had a lot of parents, and it was organic. It wasn't something that was foisted from above. And so, yeah, and I think it had a lot more value being done that way. I mean,
And it was something that, did it get pulled out sometimes in times of crisis?
Absolutely. We had business cards with them on. And, the thought was that, it'd be nice if everybody carried one in their wallets. And a lot of people did. A lot of people did it. Because I could remember being in staff meetings, and one of my guys would pull it out and say, well, while we're doing this, we should think of this, which I thought was always very interesting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk a minute about the GE's Corporate Executive Council. Now, you did serve on that.
Yes, I did.
And what were your primary responsibilities? And being on this council, did it help you? And in what ways as a PR
It was
practitioner?
mainly for me, well, I think for most people there, it was really an information exchange, sharing experience. Met quarterly for 2 days at Crotonville, which is GE's executive training center, management training center. And it would be the heads of all the major businesses, plus the senior corporate staff officers. So there'd be, between 25 and 30 people there at any time. And each of the businesses would give a report. And it wasn't supposed to be a dog and pony show kind of report. It was going to be, what issues we're facing and how we were proposing to deal with them, that kind of a thing. And people would chime in. And, somebody might be facing a certain issue and somebody else might have dealt with the same issue 2 years ago. And it was a big information. It was kind of freewheeling. The only set part of the agenda was the order in which people were going to make their little presentations. Otherwise, it wasn't like, 10 minutes here or 15 minutes here. It was very organic as far as, as needed for a conversation. And a lot of ideas were put forward there, kicked around, concepts. It was just, for me, I didn't have to do anything except listen. And occasionally, well, Joyce, what do you think, the PR impact would be, or what do you think the reaction would be? I would make that kind of contribution, but I didn't have a lot of, I didn't do a lot of talking. I listened. It was incredibly educational for me. And it really was great. That's why Jack had the meetings, because he used them to find out, a lot of things that were going on and to get interaction and to have ideas exchanged.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So everyone knew what the other person
Right.
was up to.
Right. Yeah.
You mentioned Crotonville.
Yeah.
Just tell me about that for a minute, how that worked and how you were involved.
Okay, executive education, management education in general, is very, very important at GE. It's an absolute core value at GE that you should always be learning, always learning. And so a lot of the people we hire directly out of college, in fact, most of them, are hired into programs, financial management program, the business management program, marketing program, engineering, a couple of different engineering programs. And the idea of these programs are that you're learning how, you in addition to having a job, your real jobs, but you also have an educational component to it that, during your first couple of years there, you're constantly, learning. You're on program for 2 years in most cases. And then, as you get more jobs and move up in the organization, there are all kinds of courses at Crotonville for all levels of employees. There's a new manager course, for example. There are courses on communications, how to make effective communications, G sort of way. There's management, and then there's 3 courses that are kind of take the people who are considered the high potential people in the company, and take them through these 3 courses. And the first one is the manager development course, MDC. Then the second one is the business development, BDC, and the third one is the executive, EDC. And they, the first one, that management development one, there might be like 6 of those a year, 6 separate sessions of them. The second one, the business development one, there might be 3 separate sessions. But by the time you get to the executive development course, there's just 1 session a year. So you can see it's really a pyramid thing. And the final one, the EDC one, are people who are probably on the verge of becoming officers, or actually some new officers. So but there's always something going on at Crotonville. Also, some businesses use it to bring customers there, and it's huge. They keep adding more dormitory space. I was there for a retirement dinner a few months ago, and stayed overnight. I didn't want to be driving home at midnight, through the backwoods. And I was amazed that, because it had been 3 years since I'd been there, that they had all these new dormitory rooms, and it's gotten really huge. But it's like a college campus. It has classroom buildings, it has dormitory, very nice dormitory building, recreation building, all kinds of public spaces, and I think it's used probably 360 days a year.
And entirely GE.
Entirely GE.
Wow. Okay.
Except for, as I said, when some businesses will bring customers in there or something, But
right.
Otherwise, it's GE.
You mentioned your position as a woman and the comment that was made to you in, I think, 1963. And so let's talk a second about women in the corporate world and look at business in general and then specifically at GE. Now, in '79, Glamour named you, I think the title was one of their Working Women of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
And then also in Business Week, you were one of the 50 women to watch. Talk a little bit about your experience as a woman working in corporate America back in the late 70s and early 80s. What was that like?
Practically everything I've done in my life, I was the first woman, the only woman, the first and only woman. So, after a while, I got kind of accustomed to it. It was interesting, some of the reactions. I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. Okay. A lot of men, especially older men, really felt women had no business being in management or executive positions. Absolutely. A lot of them, and when I was at Gannett, I was a star reporter. I was good, I was good. And there was a executive editor there who was my boss's boss, who absolutely hated me. And he made my life, and but it was almost, it was sexual harassment without being sexual harassment. I know that sounds weird, but that's what it was. And so when Con Edison offered me, the job, that's why I went there. One of the reasons I went there was because, I just couldn't stand working for this man anymore. There was nothing I could do about it. I mean, he's my boss's boss. What do I do about it? But then, after I got to Con Ed, I was, I think, the first woman manager at Con Ed. And Con Ed had like, 20,000 plus employees then. It wasn't a small enterprise. And I called some officer. I needed some information about something. So I called some officer to see whether I could come over to his office to get briefed on whatever it was. And he said he would have to get back to me. And then he called another guy, another officer that I knew, and he said, some woman named Joyce called me saying she was a manager of media relations. Is she really? Do I have to talk to her? Okay, that was one Con Edison. And that was just human nature. That wasn't, Con Ed. My other Con Ed thing, though, this one was terrible, was that there was a certain officer at the time, a big guy, former career service guy. I was riding up on an elevator with him one day, and I was wearing a dress that had an animal print on it. And he leaned over, and he grabbed me here, and he said, "My, that's a pretty little tiger." And I was like, I hit him. I was so amazed, and I hit him. I went back, and I told my boss, who was, my boss at the time, and I said, this was horrible. And I said, I want to report him to somebody. I said, this can't be allowed. And my boss said to me, that was just Frank being Frank. Boys will be boys. And stuff like that happened all the time, And so as more and more women came into the,
You didn't have anywhere to turn.
I had nowhere to turn. My boss said, boys will be boys. My boss was a wimp, right? So, but anyhow, it was like, okay, so there were things like that. At GE, my first general management meeting at GE, GE used to do books, kind of Facebooks almost, pictures with 100-word biographies before these general management meetings, so that everybody would know what everybody was. And so that my first year that I went there, in that book, there were 510 men and me. I still have it, obviously, because it's, what a cool thing. Right. 510 men and me. And it was that way for 3 or 4 years. I was the only woman officer there until, I think, about 1989, maybe. So about 7 years. So after a couple of years, there were other women at the general management meeting. Yeah, one year there'd be 2, the next year there'd be 3. But at the officers' meeting, which was 120 or so people, I was the only woman for many years.
Right.
And
you were the girl.
I was the girl.
And they were Jack's boys.
Yeah, and but I knew sports, so that made it less different. If I didn't know, if I didn't know sports, I don't know what I would have done. There would have been nothing to talk to them about. It would have been,
Wow.
It was a locker room kind of place. It really was. If you read Bill Lane's book, you get the feeling that it was, very much, it was macho, and it was a locker room. Right. Jack, on the other hand, was terrific. Jack was very willing, to give women opportunities, to give them a chance, and really encouraged others. He really encouraged his people that, there are all these great women out there. Find them, promote them, develop them, train them. Yeah. So, but it was young women today have no clue what it was like. Young women today, so many of them want everything. They want the high 6-figure job. but they also want, 3 children and a house in the country, and they think that they should have it all. In my generation, people had to make choices. All of my best friends during that period were women who were, also in careers, and we're still, there are 5 of us who are still very friendly today from the Con Edison days. And none of us have children, because back then, in the 1960s and 70s, it was really either or. And now, women today, so many of them, I know so many of them, think they should have it all. And they get angry when they, when they feel their employer isn't giving them enough time off or something. So I tell them.
It's a balancing act.
It is, yeah. But, nowhere is it written that, anyone deserves something just because they want it. It's like, but it seems like there's no more choices anymore.
No.
Yeah, so.
Let's talk a second about the relationship between the PR practitioner and the CEO, and having that access, but then were you ever in an experience when Jack Welch would refuse your counsel and you felt so strongly about it,
Well,
conflicts would arise?
Yeah. Jack, as I said, is a very strong personality. However, he didn't want yes people around him. He most assuredly didn't want people who would just agree with everything. He liked pushback. There's no question about it. And so we'd have some pretty good back and forth. And when I felt that I was right, I'd be tenacious, and showing him why, and marshaling facts, not just emotion, but facts. And in those cases, he eventually, would see my point, because I was just so, I knew I was right. I knew I was right. And because I just had a different perspective than he did. And some of the things were silly, and some of them were quite serious. But no, he valued good advice.
Good. Yeah. Was there ever comments, problems that the argument or the advice was coming from a woman, and the way everyone else would interpret what was happening, would it be different when the arguments were between you and Jack Welch, and when it would be between another male counterpart?
Oh, he abused all of us. It was he was an equal opportunity abuser when he was, in a nice sort of way. I mean, he it was fun.
In June 2005, you received the Arntz Award from Syracuse University for excellence in corporate communications. In today's society, how important is corporate communication in fostering trust and credibility with the public? And also, that said, do you see a problem with that exchange in the terminology? In other words, instead of being, quote, the PR person, suddenly a more general terminology of just communications, in charge of communications, is being used. And do you see a problem with that? Is that making the value of PR less important, or is it related to PR?
Well, I've always considered it more communications, because, as I said a bit ago, there's so many audiences out there, including your employees, and I don't think employees should think that they're getting something that's meant for an external world. I think that I think communications is the better term. Mm-hmm. I think in some quarters, PR, public relations, has become a pejorative, and I think communications is a more neutral word. Okay.
So how important is this communications?
Oh,
obviously, in fostering this trust and the credibility.
Oh, it's totally important.
Why is it important? How can you leverage it? Things are transparent now. If you start talking about the new media, it's instantaneous communication.
It's unbelievable. I mean, the combination of Sarbanes-Oxley and the new media has totally changed communications. It's just amazing because Sarbanes-Oxley makes, I'm on a corporate board of directors, I'm an outside director, and it is just amazing what Sarbanes-Oxley makes a corporation do. And of course, the new media is just absolutely amazing. I mean, 15 years ago, I mean, who'd have thought of, telephone cameras or YouTube or video streaming or any of this stuff. I was just thinking the other day, the whole Hillary Clinton thing about when she said that she was dodging bullets in Bosnia, and she was telling the world she was dodging bullets in Bosnia, and some TV network pulled out a clip of that very arrival in Bosnia, which was all sunshine and flowers and cheerfulness, and within hours, probably less time, it was on YouTube, and it was being emailed around the world. I think everybody must have gotten multiple copies of that. And just think, how long ago none of that would have been possible.
Right.
So that just shows that, why telling the truth is very important, because there's very few places to hide anymore.
That's true. Let's talk a minute about education, PR education, communications education. So do you believe that this next generation of PR practitioners will be equipped with the core values that are necessary to allow them to ethically resolve these complex problems and issues that corporate CEOs are facing nowadays?
Well, there are good people in every generation. I don't think, values belong to any particular generation. I think that today, I think some people make the mistake of taking too many courses about the practice of PR and not enough courses of substance to learn about economics or history or finance or whatever. I know the reason why I got my MBA while I was working full-time at Con Edison, and the reason why I did it was that suddenly I was being responsible for an annual report, and I literally didn't know the difference between an income statement and a balance sheet. And so I went off and got an MBA. It's valuable for me, absolutely invaluable, because you learn how to talk the language of business. And but I think now I've totally digressed from your question, but I think that people, students, young people, young practitioners, they have to just keep learning, and they have to have just a very broad knowledge of things, or at least a broad knowledge of how to find out things, to give them continuing credibility, and being on top of the world. I think a childlike sense of curiosity is wonderful. I think it helps. I'm still a child.
I can relate to that too. Let's see. Here's a hard one. What are the most important issues, those enduring truths that you've learned in your career?
Always tell the truth, number one. Always tell the truth, number two. I think that is the thing that I have pounded into people. I was lucky that it's sort of innate to me. And I've just pounded it into so many people that always tell the truth, because number one, you never forget what you said. And number two, you never have to, go backtracking, like the Hillary Clinton example, And that is the absolute number one principle.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about, I don't know when this was, if you still are you still president of the philanthropic arm of General Electric?
No. I retired from GE in January of 2004.
Okay. What was that like? that whole experience as being president of that?
Oh,
philanthropic?
I enjoyed it. It was wonderful. Jack was about to retire as CEO, and Jack Welch was about to retire as CEO of the company, and there was a vacancy in the presidency of the foundation. And I just thought that I'd worked for Jack for like 19 years at that point, and I just wanted to do something else. That I didn't want to continue the 24/7 thing for a new CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just moved over to I asked Jack, and Jack thought it was a great idea, and it was fun. It was you do good things, and you see tangible results of doing good things. We did a lot of inner city education, and we saw very tangible results.
What was your best accomplishment? What are you most proud of that you've done in your lifetime, your professional lifetime? And it doesn't have to be professional. What was it?
Probably, this is going to sound weird. I just think the fact that I made my parents really proud of me. I grew up, in pretty simple circumstances. Neither of my parents went to high school. My mom was, stay-at-home wife and mother, and my dad was a policeman in a small town. And so I just, I worked hard. Obviously, I was lucky that I'm reasonably intelligent, but I worked hard at everything I did, whether I was a checkout girl in a supermarket when I was in high school, or a kid reporter working 80 hours a week. Worked hard, but I think that the fact that my father died earlier, he didn't see all my success, but my mother did, and I was her little girl, and she was just so proud of it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to counselors here. So the aim of the Arthur Page Center, which is located at Penn State University, and the Arthur Page Society is to help individuals become counselors to leadership. How do you prepare yourself for something like that, to be a good counselor?
Well, I think first of all, you better have a pretty good knowledge of the subject matter that's involved in this, whatever industry or whatever it is. I think that knowledge is so important, and you have to make decisions from a point where you know something. So I think clearly just become an absolute expert on whatever is at hand here. And I think you have to show that you're a team player. I think you have to obviously always tell the truth, and that's, like I said, always tell the truth in every situation. But I think you have to be candid. You have to be very candid. You have to know when to fight back, but you have to be armed with facts. Really, I think that knowledge and the ability to communicate clearly, first to the leadership that you're trying to counsel, and then subsequently communicate to whatever the larger audience is, whether it's the media or government or Wall Street or employees. And so I think that those communication skills, the ability to think and communicate clearly, is absolutely, absolutely essential. I'm appalled today that so many people really can't seem to write. I think that, I go around saying, everybody should take News Writing 101. It teaches you how to write clearly and concisely. Because I used to get all these job applications from people claiming their great communication skills and great research skills. Well, half the time they spelled my name wrong. Great research skills you have there, kid. And the letters would be so ungrammatical. It was just like, people can't write today. And I take pride in it, and I like it when others do too. Yeah.
If you were hiring, let's say you're back in the business world, you were hiring some, let's say some students coming out of Syracuse come to you and they want a position. What are those characteristics besides the writing skills? What other characteristics are you looking for from students?
High energy.
Okay.
Okay, definitely communication skills, obviously, both
Right.
written and spoken. High energy, something, a pattern of accomplishment, that they've done something and stuck to it. Maybe some, actual writing under deadlines, like working. I always like kids who are editors of college newspapers. I just think that shows, number one, a dedication to the craft, and number two, they're not getting edited particularly, so you read it and see that maybe they can write and they can write under deadline, but high energy, I can't, and also likable. I always had as my theory that there's probably 100 people out there, or 100,000 people out there who can do this job. You're going to have lots of people who technically can do this job, but you're going to spend 10 hours a day with that person. So make sure it's somebody you want to spend 10 hours a day with. It's true, though.
Yeah, that is. Well, we're sort of at the wrap-up phase here, and what haven't we talked about? Is there anything that you would like to talk about or like to tell, like, again, this next generation, or perhaps 20 years down the road, a researcher who might be?
20 years down the road, I can't predict or imagine what communication is going to be like. I mean, the way it is moving forward exponentially. It's like, from camera phones to iPhones to these little computers that cost $300, and they're just as good as a big computer. I mean, all the functionality, all the speed. It's just text messaging, right? I'm sorry, that little chirping is my is my BlackBerry saying I'm having messages. I can't predict what it's going to be 20 years ago, because 20 years from now, 20 years ago, I never would have predicted. 20 years ago, we were just getting faxes,
Right.
in the office. And I was yelling at people. I had some consultants who didn't have a fax. And I made them get a fax. It was so annoying that they didn't have a fax, So that's how fast. I mean, I grew up on a manual typewriter,
Right.
So, and hot type, those old typesetting machines, with the presses roaring. I mean, it was just and that wasn't that long ago. That there was, it was the era of hot type and no computers. And
Yes, time does move quickly.
Yeah.
Can you talk again a little bit more about your accomplishments and things you've done in your lifetime that you feel proud of?
Well, as far as I said, the thing I feel proudest about is that I made my parents so proud. But as far as professionally, I was trying to think what thing professionally, because I've been involved with so many. And the thing that I think I'm proudest of is that in December following 9/11, I convinced GE to fund the Twin Tower of Light thing down here at the tip of Manhattan. And the idea was conceived by a guy named Kent Barwick, who was then chairman of the Municipal Art Society, president of the Municipal Art Society. Kent was a very close friend of mine at Syracuse. And we actually worked together on the daily newspaper at Syracuse. And he was down here as president of the Municipal Art Society, and I was, at that point, head of the GE Foundation. And he came up with the idea of the Twin Towers of Light, but they needed a lot of money to do it, and equipment and everything else. And so I convinced GE to do it. And that, of course, is just an enduring picture,
Right.
And I fought. I had to fight within GE for that, because there are a lot of people who thought it was less than the world's best idea. So, yeah.
Well, let me just thank you very much for giving up some of your time during this beautiful afternoon. I really appreciate it.